Hey, what's up guys, Mergaman4 here, back with another video, and Doctor Who is back. I am so excited. Series 10 started last night with the pilot, and I think it was a great start to the series. Not only was it a series premiere, but it was also the introduction of a new companion, which hasn't happened for a very long time. The last one was 4 years ago with Clara, and so I think it was due time that we had a new companion. It's just so refreshing to have Doctor Who back, because it's been a year and a half since the last season, and even though we did have the return of Dr. Mysterio last Christmas, it really has been a long time since we've properly had weekly Doctor Who. And I have to say, last night's episode did not disappoint. It lived up to my expectations, and it was a pretty good episode overall, and of course I'm going to go into my thoughts and opinions as to why I think that. Of course, the obvious place to start is the new companion. Bill Potts was introduced in the pilot last night, and I think that she is great. I already had a feeling that she was going to be a good companion in the clip last year. I know a lot of people found her annoying, but I liked her. I thought it was a little bit different from what had been done before, and this episode definitely reaffirms that for me. Something that I really appreciated about her in this episode was that she felt so different from the last few companions. Amy and Clara especially had these arcs that were attached to them, Amy with the girl who waited and Clara with the impossible girl, that were always associated with them and kind of helped to drive their character. But what I really like about Bill is that, kind of like with the Russell T Davies era companions, she doesn't have a label like that. She feels like a real person to me. Something that I think helped with that is the fact that we get to see her go through a whole bunch of different emotions throughout the episode in various different situations. We get to see her excited, curious, in wonder, angry, upset. It's really great, the range of emotions we get to see, and Pearl Mackie does a wonderful job throughout the episode. She really sold the character for me. Not only did her emotions throughout make her seem more real to me, but something that no other companion really has had is that she's familiar with a whole bunch of sci-fi tropes, because she's seen movies, she's seen TV shows, she knows what's going on, and I think that just makes her feel so much more grounded, because of course all of us are familiar with all the sci-fi tropes, so why shouldn't the companion? And so I thought that, like, when she recognized things like the mind wipe, I thought that was really neat, and I feel like that's going to add a really good element to her character. But what I think is important is that not only does she recognize these things, but she's still filled with wonder with the things that she sees. For example, the TARDIS scene is an excellent example. The TARDIS introduction scene is probably my favorite in the whole episode. Just her reaction to it is so believable and so beautifully done. The music in the scene was beautiful, the way that it was shot was just gorgeous, and her reaction of just pure wonderment was so good. Something else about Bill that I liked, that I kind of touched on earlier, was the amount of questions that she asked. So like I said, in her introductory clip a year ago, a lot of people thought it was really annoying, the amount of questions that she was spewing out. And this was lessened a little bit in this episode, but she still asked a lot of different questions, many of which had never been asked before, and I actually really liked that element to her. The curiosity that she expressed was different from the other kinds of companions, because of course all the companions have been, at least to some extent, curious about what's going on, but she asks these really interesting questions that I don't know why they've never been asked before. I think the best example of this is when she asks about the TARDIS acronym, which only works in English, which I'd never considered before. But I'm like, yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's very good that we have a companion who's able to ask those interesting questions that no one's thought to ask before. Probably the most important element of Bill in this episode, though, is Pearl Mackie's chemistry with Peter Capaldi. It's excellent. The Doctor and Bill's relationship is really built up really well. Obviously at the beginning they don't know each other at all, but it's clear that over time they've been able to spend time with each other during those tutoring lessons, and so by the time the Doctor invites her to be a companion, it feels real because they haven't just spent one adventure together, they've spent a long time together. Granted, it's only been one adventure, but they've gotten to know each other over a long period of time, and that allows the growth in their relationship to feel a lot more realistic and believable. And the characters back and forth is really good, they play off each other really well, and I'm very excited to see what else this season has to bring for Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie. And personally, I think that this is going to end up being one of the best companion-doctor dynamics in years. Branching off of that a little bit, let's talk about the Doctor. So, as always, Peter Capaldi was really, really good in this episode. The Doctor was a little bit sidelined, but that makes sense because it's the introduction of a new companion. And the Doctor being sidelined was a common complaint throughout Series 8 and 9 as Clara was taking the forefront. I hope the Doctor isn't sidelined as much in Series 10, but in terms of this episode, I think it's good because we need to be able to learn about Bill and get used to her, and it's really good that we get to learn about the Doctor all over again through Bill's eyes. And although his role in the episode isn't quite as prominent as it could be, I'm really happy with the balance that they chose to do because it helped us to get to relate with Bill more and be able to get more used to her character before we go on adventures with her. Something I've seen mentioned is that the Doctor's personality in this seems to be kind of a mix between his Series 8 and Series 9 personalities. And yeah, I can kind of see that. I personally much prefer his Series 8 personality. So at the beginning when he was rocking out with the guitar and with the sonic shades, I really cringed because I don't like that at all. I was hoping they'd be done with that. Unfortunately, apparently they're not. But for the rest of the episode, it was back to good old 12th Doctor as I like him. And I thought that it was a really good balance between the two of them. So long as the guitar and the shades stay out of it, I'm pretty happy. Of course, we also have a couple of really emotional moments between the Doctor and Bill. The first one comes where the Doctor decides to go back in time and photograph Bill's mother, which I thought was a really nice gesture. And of course, at this point, Bill doesn't know that the Doctor's a time traveler yet, and suddenly these pictures of her mom, who's passed away when she was a baby, just suddenly turn up, and you can see the Doctor taking the photograph in a mirror in one of the photographs. And it's such a sweet moment. And you can tell already that even though Bill isn't the Doctor's companion yet, they've already got a pretty strong relationship, and the Doctor already clearly cares for her. And then at the end, he goes to wipe Bill's memory. And that was kind of a surprise for me. I wasn't expecting that at all. But for whatever reason, he's pledged to do something about the vault around the university, which is looking like it's going to be the Series 10 story arc, which I'm quite excited to discover what that's going to be all about. But the memory wipe scene I thought was really powerful as well, because Bill was very resistant to it, and then she slowly began to accept it. And then she kind of threw a question at him, how would you respond if someone was doing this to you? And I personally thought that this was a good moment when Clara's theme starts playing, because of course he forgot about Clara. I know that some people weren't too pleased with that. I think it's fine, so long as he's not like pining over losing Clara's memory as much as the 10th Doctor was pining over Rose's loss during Series 3. Because of course the Doctor has forgotten her, and he knows that he's forgotten somebody, but he can't remember who. And that, of course, changes his mind. He realizes that maybe he shouldn't do this. And I quite liked that moment. I thought it was really sweet. And even though I wasn't the biggest fan of Clara's exit and her character as a whole, I thought that it was a good little callback. But to anybody who didn't know what that was a reference to, it's not a problem at all. It's not intrusive. It's not like he started getting flashbacks of Clara or anything. Thank goodness for that. But I think it was subtle enough that it was really powerful for me. Of course, now that we've talked about Bill and the Doctor, there's something else in the room that we got to talk about, and that is Nardole. I don't actively dislike Nardole as a character. He's completely pointless. Like I talked about in my Return of Dr. Mysterio review, he adds nothing to the plot except for comic relief. You could remove him from the episode, and literally nothing would be different. Everything would play out exactly the same way. And I will admit, I enjoyed him more in the pilot than I did in the Return of Dr. Mysterio, but I still feel like he had no reason to be there in the first place. I didn't actively dislike him throughout the episode. I did find plenty of his lines pretty funny, especially after Bill finally realizes, oh, it's bigger on the inside. His line there was really funny, I thought.
Hey, we got there!
But there were a couple of lines that kind of jarred me a little bit, and I'm like, okay, just shut up now, please. You don't need to talk. And he didn't really do anything at all. And if he continues to be like this throughout the season, I won't be pleased with that. And once again, not because I actively dislike his character, just because there's no reason for him to be there. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of effort to have him there if he's just going to be comic relief and add nothing to the stories at all. So I hope his character develops more throughout the season and becomes more pivotal and important. I don't want him to just be comic relief all the way through. And in terms of this episode, I'm not too bothered by it, but I will be if it keeps up. Moving on, let's talk about the plot and the villain a little bit. The plot was really simple. It's basically like, okay, there's this mysterious puddle, starts chasing after the Doctor and his companions, and then they defeat the puddle because it turns out that it's not actually trying to hurt them. That's the basic premise of it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a simple plot. Usually you definitely want something more complex than this. This is a bit too simple for my liking, but because it is a companion introductory story, I feel like that's acceptable because the focus is on the emotion and on the character of the piece and not the plot itself. The plot is just there as a background structure so that we can actually have the character to be able to get used to. And so I wasn't a massive fan of the plot. The plot was okay. Could have been a lot better, but I don't think it's the most important thing. And same with the villain as well. I thought it was a bit lackluster, a little disappointing. It was creepy at a couple of points, but I don't know, it didn't really do anything for me. But it was all right in the context of the episode. Not terrible. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad plot. It's just not fleshed out enough to be of anything of significance, I think. One other quick thing about the plot is how Bill gets her first trips in the TARDIS here, which I don't mind too much in the context of the story. It did feel like a little bit like it was meant to stretch out the length of the story a little bit because, as I said, the plot is so simple. But what I do mind is that because it's just there to stretch out the plot a little bit, we get Bill's first experience on a brand new planet, first experience time traveling, and we don't have time for her to properly give a reaction because we're moving from one location to the next. I mean, we're on the planet for a few minutes. We're in each location for a few minutes, so there is a bit of time for a reaction. But I would have preferred if you have a whole episode for her to get used to the idea of being on another planet. I think that you need a bit more time to flesh that out a little bit. And I feel a bit let down that her first experience on an alien planet is just to pad out the runtime a little bit. I wish that we had more time for her to experience that so we can get an even better reaction from her, because all this running around and going from place to place to place is just takes away from that opportunity that we have to fully experience her reaction. She doesn't have time to process it all before they got to move on to the next place. And so branching off of this, we have the Daleks back in this episode for not very long. I think maybe it was 5 minutes. The Movellans, not even worth talking about them. It was nice to have a cameo from them. The Daleks themselves, I'm a bit bothered by this. I'm glad that they didn't have a full episode, I'll be honest, because I feel like it's good for them to have a break. Series 6 is so far the only new series season that has not had a Dalek story. Series 10 is also going to be that way as well, which I think is good to be able to have that break. But it feels like it's just shoved in there because they had to have the Daleks. There's 3 possibilities I can think of. Either there's a contractual obligation to have the Daleks in every season, which would make sense because they've had at least a cameo in every season, but Stephen Moffat has denied this. The second option is that they added in the Daleks because they needed to find some way to find Friend from the Future, the scene where Bill was first introduced last year. They needed to fit that into the episode somehow, which, speaking of that, they cut it down significantly to just a couple of the lines of dialogue. So pretty much, it was pretty pointless to even have in the episode to begin with. It was kind of neat, but I honestly felt like that whole clip was a little pointless. The third option is that they just added in the Daleks because Daleks sell. To see a Dalek in the trailer, that gets people excited. And I don't think any of those reasons are particularly valid for having the Daleks in the episode because they felt really shoehorned in. They had no impact on the episode whatsoever. You could have had any other kind of villain in there that would replace them, and it wouldn't have made any difference to the basic plot. And they just felt so pointless, which I hate to see with the Daleks, because I think the Daleks should only be used if they can be used to the best of their ability, to their most menacing, and that hasn't happened for a long, long time. The other problem I have with the Daleks' appearance in this is not just because it's pointless, but because it's acting as an introduction on 2 fronts. For one thing, this episode has been touted as a point where anyone can enter into the show without having seen any prior Doctor Who. So this serves as a point of introduction to the Daleks for both the new companion and potentially the audience as well. Which sucks, because it's a terrible introduction to the Daleks, let's be honest. It's horrendous. I personally think that the very best episode of all of Doctor Who to introduce the Daleks to somebody is Dalek. Obviously that's not going to happen with the companion, but as an audience introduction, I would not want this episode, this brief appearance, to be my introduction to the Daleks. It's terrible. And with the companion too, it seems that Bill, if she does leave after the series, which has heavily been rumored, she won't have a proper Dalek story. So if this is her only encounter with the Daleks, that's kind of sad. I would wish that there was no encounter at all if this is the case. But yeah, as an introduction to the Daleks, it's horrendous. Don't even describe what the Daleks is. They don't show what they do. When Bill asks the Doctor, what's a Dalek, he literally responds,
"Never mind, it's a Dalek."
So it's very disappointing on that front. And I'm happy that they weren't the main villain. I'm happy that there's not a whole Dalek episode, but I'm disappointed that it's there in the first place, and I think that it would have been much better without it being there. To be honest though, the Dalek section is probably my biggest complaint of the episode. So overall, I think if I were to choose one word to sum up this episode, I would use fresh. It felt new to me. It didn't feel like we were repeating some of the same basic stuff over and over again. And obviously that's definitely a good thing, especially since this is being stated as a potential introduction point to Doctor Who. So I'm really happy that it feels new, it feels fresh, and even though we're being reintroduced to a lot of these elements, it doesn't feel like we're going through the same old boring drivel again and again and again. It feels brand new, which I love. And so I'm very excited for this upcoming season and where it's going to take us. And so overall, I think I would give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. It wasn't amazing, but I think it was a pretty good series opener, definitely a good companion introduction. Probably one of the best ones we've had in a long, long time. And it's great to have Doctor Who back after a 1.5-year hiatus. I think it definitely lived up to the expectations. But yeah, so that's basically my thoughts and opinions on the pilot. Please put in the comments below what you thought of the episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? All opinions are welcome. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts and opinions on the episode, and I hope you'll join me next week when I talk about Smile with the emoji bots, which I'm kind of skeptical about, but I'm going to give it a chance. Anyways, Burgerman 4, over and out. I'll see you guys later.